For nearly 30 years, the identity of JonBenet Ramsey has cast a long shadow over American culture. Discovered without signs of life inside her family home on the day following Christmas, this 6-year-old left behind not only a grieving family, but also a series of eerie clues, persistent mysteries, and a deep fracture in public confidence toward child protection systems. What transpired was far beyond a simple domestic catastrophe. It transformed into a nationwide fixation, propelled by outlandish hypotheses, procedural failures by law enforcement, and a media firestorm that shredded personal reputations. Today, propelled by cutting-edge forensic tools and startling new disclosures, the final answer appears tantalizingly near. However, the emerging reality is far more disturbing than anyone previously imagined. The fateful Christmas season began on December 25, 1996, which should have been a routine festive evening for the Ramsey household in Boulder, Colorado. John and Patricia "Patty" Ramsey accompanied their 2 offspring, 9-year-old Burke and 6-year-old JonBenet, to a neighbor's gathering for Christmas dinner. Returning late that night, Patty reportedly settled her daughter into bed before retiring herself. The family occupied a sprawling 3-story residence, a testament to John's professional achievements as president of Access Graphics, a firm that had recently eclipsed $1 billion in gross sales. Outwardly, the Ramseys enjoyed every advantage: financial security, social standing, and an idealized domestic life frequently praised by neighbors. Yet the following dawn brought an irreversible transformation. At approximately 5:52 a.m. on December 26th, Patty Ramsey came across an odd, excessively wordy ransom demand placed on the staircase. The note requested an unusually precise sum, $118,000, a figure identical to John Ramsey's recent holiday bonus. In stark contrast to typical ransom communications, this document was neither abrupt nor ambiguous. It extended over 2.5 pages, composed on Patty's personal notepad using one of her own pens. Shaken and fearful, Patty dialed 911, convinced that her daughter had been abducted. Upon arrival, law enforcement committed their first catastrophic error. They approached the residence as a kidnapping scene rather than a potential homicide site. Only JonBenet's bedroom was secured. Relatives, acquaintances, and even visitors moved freely in and out, inadvertently tainting evidence across the entire property. Hours afterward, during one of true crime history's most sorrowful episodes, John Ramsey personally located his daughter's remains in the basement. She had suffered a blow to the skull, been asphyxiated with a homemade ligature constructed from a cord and a snapped paintbrush handle, and her mouth had been covered with adhesive tape. The medical examiner subsequently classified her death as a homicide resulting from suffocation combined with cranial injury. In that single moment, the Ramseys' flawless existence disintegrated completely. From the outset, the inquiry into JonBenet's death was riddled with mistakes that would shadow the case for decades. Boulder police, lacking experience with major homicides, inadequately protected the Ramsey property. Friends, neighbors, and even clergy wandered through the house, potentially erasing or spoiling critical forensic material. When John Ramsey lifted his daughter's body from the basement after its discovery, whatever physical evidence remained on her or around the scene was permanently lost. The ransom note emerged as one of the most peculiar and hotly debated exhibits, unusually lengthy, extraordinarily specific, and penned with materials sourced from inside the Ramsey home. Specialists argued about whether it had been fabricated, likely to divert investigators. The peculiar sum, $118,000, directly aligned with John Ramsey's year-end bonus, fueling speculation that the author possessed intimate financial knowledge of the family. For many observers, this fact pointed squarely at an insider. Suspicion almost instantly fell upon the Ramseys themselves. Law enforcement officials and the media hypothesized that Patty Ramsey, a former pageant queen, could have authored the note to conceal an accident involving her daughter. Others murmured about Burke, JonBenet's 9-year-old sibling, proposing that he might have injured her during a childish outburst, and that the parents orchestrated a fake kidnapping to shield them. Detectives interviewed John and Patty jointly instead of separately, another grave procedural lapse, allowing them to hear and potentially coordinate their responses. The post-mortem examination only deepened the complexity. JonBenet exhibited definitive evidence of head trauma and strangulation, yet several other findings remained ambiguous and open to interpretation. Investigators also observed that fibers from Patty Ramsey's attire were present on the adhesive tape recovered at the scene, intensifying suspicions. Nevertheless, in 1998, DNA analysis produced an unforeseen result: the existence of an unknown male's genetic material on JonBenet's garments, evidence that matched neither John, Patty, Burke, nor any other family member. Despite this revelation, public distrust toward the family only intensified. In 1999, a grand jury discreetly voted to charge John and Patty Ramsey with child neglect leading to death and acting as accomplices to a crime. However, District Attorney Alex Hunter declined to endorse the indictment, citing inadequate proof. For years, this fact remained concealed, only coming to light more than a decade afterward. Yet the harm had already been inflicted. The Ramseys were stigmatized as perpetrators in popular perception, even after DNA findings would later exonerate them. As the years stretched on, the case attracted a steady stream of conjecture, bogus admissions, and persons of interest who initially appeared credible, but ultimately proved irrelevant. Periodically, a fresh hypothesis or an odd individual emerged, keeping the tragedy in news cycles, but never delivering genuine resolution. One early person of note was Bill McReynolds, a family acquaintance who portrayed Santa Claus for local children and had called on the Ramseys shortly before Christmas. He acknowledged feeling a unique attachment to JonBenet, even preserving glitter she had given him, which he wished to be blended into his cremated remains. Although disconcerting to many, no solid evidence ever connected him to the crime. Another individual, Gary Oliva, a registered sex offender residing near the Ramseys, also attracted attention. Shortly after JonBenet's death, he reportedly phoned an acquaintance, admitting he had harmed a young girl. Yet again, DNA ruled him out. The most sensational turn came in 2006, when an American teacher named John Markar was taken into custody in Bangkok, Thailand. He asserted that he had been with JonBenet on the night she perished, that he cherished her, and that her death was unintended. His narrative was sufficiently detailed to generate worldwide headlines, but the relief of an apparent breakthrough proved fleeting. Genetic evidence rapidly demonstrated he had no involvement in the crime. Prosecutors dismissed all allegations, and Carr's troubling fixation was deemed a fantasy rather than an admission. In the meantime, scientific progress quietly redirected the investigation's trajectory. By 2003, forensic testing had uncovered foreign male DNA on JonBenet's clothing, genetic material that did not correspond to anyone in the Ramsey family or any known suspect. This marked a pivotal moment. In 2008, Boulder officials formally exonerated John and Patty Ramsey, issuing an official apology for years of suspicion and affirming that the DNA evidence exculpated them. Tragically, Patty did not survive to receive this apology. She succumbed to ovarian cancer in 2006 at age 49, bearing the burden of public blame until her final days. Even with the family cleared, the source of the mysterious male DNA remained unidentified. Investigators possessed only partial genetic information, minuscule fragments insufficient for full identification by 1990s technical standards. But science was advancing, and with it came a methodology that would ultimately transform everything: genetic genealogy. By the time JonBenet's case entered its third decade, optimism was fading. Nearly 1,000 DNA specimens had been examined, more than 21,000 leads explored, and countless potential perpetrators scrutinized, all without an arrest. For many, it seemed the case would forever stay unresolved. Yet the persistent progression of science offered a faint ray of hope. In the 2010s, an innovative technique called genetic genealogy began cracking cold cases once considered hopeless. This strategy merged DNA profiling with family tree exploration. Even if a perpetrator had never provided DNA, distant relatives might have done so through ancestry platforms or genetic testing services. By analyzing these links, detectives could gradually reconstruct family lineages, narrowing the pool of possible suspects until they pinpointed their target. High-profile triumphs, such as the apprehension of the Golden State Killer in 2018, demonstrated the power of this approach. Soon, relatives of other victims started demanding that the same technology be applied to their cases. Among them was John Ramsey, who by the 2020s had relocated to Utah, but never ceased advocating for justice for his daughter. He criticized Boulder police for adhering to outdated practices and implored them to permit external experts to assist. Finally, in 2024, Boulder police partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, a foremost firm in genetic genealogy. Using the preserved genetic fragments from JonBenet's clothing, experts generated a far more robust profile and uploaded it into public genealogy databases. Initially, only distant relatives appeared, cousins many generations removed, but that sufficed to begin constructing the puzzle. Over months, researchers cross-checked DNA outcomes against public documents, birth and marriage certificates, and even social media accounts. Gradually, a portrait emerged. The trail pointed to a single individual. In 1996, he had been 34 years old, residing just 2 miles from the Ramsey home. He worked for a catering company that frequently served events in the Ramsey neighborhood, including one located only doors away from the family residence that holiday season. By 2024, he was in his early 60s, having moved across multiple states, Arizona, Nevada, Texas, and eventually Washington. He had prior arrests for burglary and fraud, but nothing indicating violent or predatory behavior. For decades, he had remained in obscurity, never considered a suspect. When investigators secretly retrieved his discarded DNA from a coffee cup and a cigarette, but the results were irrefutable. It matched the genetic material on JonBenet's clothing with nearly absolute certainty. After nearly 30 years, the unknown male was no longer an enigma. After confirming the DNA match in 2024, investigators quietly proceeded to collect additional evidence before executing a formal arrest. A search of the suspect's home and a rented storage unit uncovered disturbing items linking him back to 1996. Among these was an old jacket bearing fibers consistent with those discovered on JonBenet's clothing, a chilling indication of close contact on the night she perished. Forensic experts also re-examined the infamous ransom note, this time employing advanced handwriting analysis software. Writing patterns were compared against employment records and personal notes from the suspect's past. The resemblances were remarkable, reinforcing the likelihood that he was the author of the bizarre 2.5-page message. The consequences were devastating. For nearly 3 decades, the Ramsey family had endured suspicion, subjected to public scrutiny and unrelenting accusations. Meanwhile, the actual killer had roamed free, assimilating into new communities nationwide. The disclosure that he had once worked just doors from the Ramsey home only magnified the tragedy. It implied that JonBenet's death may not have been random at all, but rather the act of someone lingering nearby, observing the family and learning their habits. JonBenet herself was recalled not just as a victim, but as an energetic little girl who loved to perform. By age 6, she had already earned multiple pageant titles, ranging from Little Miss Colorado to National Tiny Miss Beauty. She delighted in dressing up, singing, and dancing, encouraged by her pageant-loving mother, and admired by her father and brother. Her radiant smile and endless vitality became preserved in photographs, an emblem of innocence taken too soon. Yet, even with a suspect identified, questions persist. Why compose a ransom note at all if JonBenet's body remained inside the house? Did the killer operate alone, or did he have assistance? Was the murder premeditated, or the outcome of a bungled burglary that escalated? These uncertainties ensure the case remains alive in public awareness, a reminder of how fragile justice can be when errors occur in the first critical hours. For John Ramsey, now in his 80s, the struggle has never truly ended. He remains dedicated to seeing the case resolved, even if the answers are darker than anyone ever conceived. What occurred in that Boulder home was not merely a family's tragedy. It became a national fixation, one that exposed the flaws in America's criminal justice system. Nearly 3 decades later, JonBenet Ramsey's story still captivates us because it was never solely about one child. It was about trust betrayed, evidence mishandled, and the unsettling prospect that justice may never feel complete.